a lot of times parents see standardized testing as, oh my goodness, it's going to put a microscope on what I'm doing and I'm afraid. And I just want to tell you, as a homeschool parent, you are pouring out your life for your child and you love them. And if you are investing your time, effort, and energy in them, that is not going to return void.
We can go ahead and welcome in our panelist. We're very excited to have, first of all, Mona Hausman. You already know her, one of our HLA counselors who handles a lot of work for our seniors specifically, but for high school in general. And then our special guest today is Miss Kimberly Farley. She is a veteran homeschool mom. She is the director of homeschool partnerships at Classic Learning Test. And also her kids graduated through HLA as well. So previous HLA mom, so she knows the drill. Kimberly, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks, Jay. It's always a pleasure to be here. And nice to see Mona online. I think I've talked to her a number of times as my kids were going through, especially like the last year or two of high school and trying to get all those transcripts and application things done. I know I had some communication with Mona then.
Awesome. All right, so Mona and I are going to go ahead and shut our video and audio off, and we will let Kimberly take over. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be released as VOD to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/HomeLife Academy. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. So much good stuff going up there every week, every other week or so. A lot of helpful videos and tips going up there. All right, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you so much to everyone for being here, and especially to you, Kimberly. We'll see you after.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, I'm going to share my screen because I do have some slides ready so we can you'll have a visual of what I'm talking about. So let me get that ready and let's hope everything is working smoothly. Okay, so the title of the talk today is To Test or Not to Test. That is the question. Little nod there. We are a Classic Learning Test. You gotta love some Shakespeare. So little nod to the great bard. And we're going to talk a lot about some pros and cons of testing, ways to alleviate some anxiety related to it, that kind of thing. We're also going to talk a little bit about college entrance exams toward the end. This is not a really CLT specific webinar, but I'm happy to answer questions as they come up. Just wanted to talk about testing in general. So today, we're going to talk testing and assessment in general, not just standardized testing, and then more specifically standardized testing, some key considerations as you're contemplating using this, then college entrance exam considerations, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. If you do have any questions in the meantime, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A. Mona can interrupt me at any time, or we can save those for the end, whichever is more appropriate. So let's get started. As we think about testing and assessment, we assess our children all the time, right? This is not simply a matter of taking a test. This is having your kid read aloud to you as they are learning to read. This is asking them questions after you've read something together. Do you have your kids narrate something back to you after they read it or you read it to them? All of that is assessment. So we are assessing our children all the time. It's a necessary part of education, right? If we just did a bunch of input without checking anything, I think we all know we wouldn't get a great response. So first of all, let's just think of assessment very holistically, that it is something that happens day in and day out. It is a necessary part of education. But then there are different types and purposes for assessment. So I'll throw in a few kind of assessment terms here. We will hear about diagnostic testing. This is different than the medical diagnostic testing, but diagnostic testing educationally just establishes a baseline of what a student knows. So if you think about a pretest that maybe you give a student to see what their knowledge base is, I know they use these a lot in group schooling environments, right? To understand where everybody is at before they start a new topic. But it may even be just discussion. Maybe you're just having a conversation with your kiddos before you jump into the next unit and you want to kind of get an idea of where they are. Then also self-assessment comes in. What do I know? What do I need to know more about? So all of us will do some level of diagnostic testing before we learn something new. There is formative testing. So this is just information about the effectiveness of instruction. So this is often done in the midst of things that are happening, right? So in the midst of your day-to-day education, we're checking in and making sure that formation is happening of our students over these topics. So we ask them questions, we expect answers. So it could be oral, it could be written responses to this. It may even be those independent work assignments of like answering questions and those little things that check. A lot of our textbooks may be set up with little knowledge questions in the middle of the chapter, right? They don't wait till you get to the end of the chapter to have all that. Those are formative questions. Like we're checking in as we progress through it to see if our students have a good understanding of where we are. But then there are summative assessments. So this is information about understanding and retention. So this is where we think about the more complete end of season kind of testing. These are final papers and projects. These would be midterms or final exams. We all remember those from our college days, perhaps, of how much stress there was right around those 2 times of the semester when you had to spend a lot of time preparing. But it could also be end of chapter exams. So we also see this in more of a classical education of defending a thesis, right? Or, at the end of a master's or a PhD program, you have to defend a thesis that is going to be this summative assessment of what you have done for the whole of your education. So we kind of think about it in those terms. We have the diagnostic, the formative, and the summative assessments, and they all play a role in how we assess our children. So standardized testing is another way that we can assess our students. And sometimes it's used as a diagnostic tool. Where are my kids? Are they sitting where they need to be? Like sometimes we even use standardized testing to maybe get a reading level so we can choose the just right readers for our students. So there are diagnostic standardized tests that we use in order to help us understand how to meet their needs best. But it's more often thought of as a summative assessment. At the end of the year, we do a test to see where our students are. Did they progress from the spring of last year to the spring of this year? Are we on track with things? But with anything, and sometimes you will see tests labeled this way, diagnostic, formative, summative, you will see these labels sometimes on tests, and that just helps you get an idea of what their intent is. But the most important aspect of any standardized test is, are you using it to enhance education? Right. So it's not the only tool in our toolbox. We're going to use a lot of forms of assessment, but it can be a tool that is used as you are trying to get a better idea of how to improve your students' education. So first of all, let me talk a little bit about standardized testing, because I realize that it is kind of a dirty word in our society. It can be a dirty word, especially in homeschool circles. I have, you kind of hear people spit sometimes when they say standardized testing. And so I just want to talk a little bit about this and kind of give you some perspective on it. And I will tell you, first off, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think everybody has to do it. But I want to talk about the implications just as we talk overall about this topic. First of all, we have to realize that it is pervasive in our society. And I know I've heard so many people talking about, oh, standardized testing is going away. Look at the test optional movement. We're going to talk a little bit about that toward the end, but standardized testing is not going away. It is just kind of everywhere. If you look at, I realize we're not in schools, but schools are usually required to do end of year testing. And there is a good bit of angst surrounding that for some very understandable reasons. But there are entrance exams, but it is not just the college entrance exams. I know we all got very focused on that during COVID and during test optional. My son was actually preparing for the LSAT for law school during COVID. LSAT got remote proctoring going. He took the LSAT from his bedroom with a camera and mirrors and all kinds of things that he had to have set up for that. And the American Bar Association just said, like, LSAT is not going away. They are keeping that as a standard for most law schools. But med school, dental school, all of these graduate schools generally require some sort of entrance exam. So just keep that in mind, that even if some of the, even if you can apply test optional, it may come to a point later where an entrance exam is needed. But beyond that, there are a lot of certification and licensure exams that are required. If your student is pursuing a trade and you think they're going to go to trade school or they're going to apprentice to become a licensed tradesman, a lot of times there are exams that are required in order to get that licensure. I am an occupational therapist. I haven't practiced for a number of years, but that is my background. I had to sit and take a one-day test. It was given once a year at the time that I was taking it. And if you didn't pass it on that one day, you didn't practice for the next year. And, talk about a high pressure exam. And that's true of pretty much all the medical fields. Nursing, you're going to have to pass the NCLEX before you can practice. Doctors, have to pass their exams. So most of the skilled trades, lawyers have to pass the bar exam, but definitely even within the trades, you're going to see this. And the other one is military service, especially if you're not entering like as an officer that has already graduated from college. If you're going in as a new recruit, most of them are given the ASVAB, which is, it's actually a really interesting standardized test, and it tests a lot of different things, but students are going to be asked to take this exam, and how many options they have for where they serve in the military are due in part to how they perform on that ASVAB. So, when we think about standardized testing, everybody kind of lumps ACT, SAT and say, oh, well, they're not so popular anymore. But there's a lot of other standardized tests out there. And I just want you to be aware that your students may eventually, likely at some point in their life, have to take an exam. My husband is a computer programmer, and to get new certifications, he usually has to take exams for that too. So here he is in his 50s and still taking standardized exams to get new certifications as new things roll out. But I do want to kind of give you assurance that you don't need to fear standardized testing. It's not as scary as a lot of people have made it out to be. First of all, I think as homeschool parents, we all have this tremendous weight sometimes of like, am I going to do enough? Are my kids going to be educated well enough? I don't want to do anything that's going to compromise their future or cause them any hardships. And so a lot of times parents see standardized testing as, oh my goodness, it's going to put a microscope on what I'm doing, and I'm afraid of what those results are going to be. And I just want to tell you, like, first of all, as a homeschool parent, you are pouring out your life for your child, and you love them. And if you are investing your time, effort, and energy in them, that is not going to return void. But don't put so much stress on yourself over the results of a test. Let's use it in a productive manner, but whether or not you're succeeding or failing as a home educator is not going to be determined by one test. So just know that we can use this productively, but it is not an assessment of how effective you are as a parent or as an educator. One of the reasons that it's important not to put too much importance on this and for us to get nervous about the outcome of these exams is that our kids pick up on that. Our kids read our cues. And if we are really stressed about the outcome of an exam, they're going to know that, and they're going to be stressed about it too. And so, as I mentioned before, like, this is not the end all be all. This does not determine how successful your kid is going to be in life. Keep standardized testing in its rightful place. We are measuring one form of intelligence at one point in time, and it has nothing to do with how tenacious your child is, how hard they work. how kind they are, how much they give and pour into others. Like, it doesn't measure emotional intelligence. Like, there's all different forms of intelligence. This is one thing. We're measuring one thing here, and it is okay. Don't stress over this too much. It's certainly not determining success, but it can be a tool that can be used to help you direct education in a way that sets your kids up for the best possible outcomes, but it is not determining success or failure. So, in having standardized testing available, we do sometimes need to control test anxiety because there's a lot of stigma around standardized testing. And so I found that with my own kids, if I really downplayed it, if I made it like no big deal, this is just one of those other things that we do, like, oh, it's just one of those days in homeschool and mom's having us do something different. That helped a lot. When I just said, okay, do your best, no big deal. My kids had actually come out of public school. We started homeschooling when my kids were second, fourth, and sixth grades. And so my kids had been in an environment where there was all this pressure put on them about end of year testing because they prepared all year long for the outcome of a test. I mean, every week they were doing something to prepare for that test. So the kids really came into it with a lot of pressure about, ooh, it's standardized tests. Like, what is this going to do? And so I had to really counteract that message a lot. Like, it's no big deal. Like, we're just going to use it. It's going to be helpful information. Don't stress about it. I know you're going to do great. I just want you to do your best. That's all I expect. And so when I really downplayed it, I think the kids picked up on that message. So I had them just get comfortable with testing. We just did it every year, end of year, not a big deal. And then when it got to higher stakes testing, when we got to college entrance exam testing and all that, they were like, oh yeah, it's just a test, no big deal. So having kids that have done some testing, because this is not the way we normally operate in homeschool, right? Like, we did a lot of oral stuff. I had them write long form essays, all this. We were not doing a bunch of bubble in, kind of answers in homeschool. But because they had taken some timed tests that had multiple choice answers, it was a little easier for them to transition to that. Without adding like this whole other learning curve of, ooh, I've got to learn to do multiple choice testing. So then just as a family, keep a healthy mindset about what this testing is and just keep pressure at a minimum. And for us, this was even doing things like we started college entrance exam testing early because I wanted them to be really comfortable with it and I didn't want them to be stressed. I didn't want to wait until senior year when they knew they only had like 2 times that they could get the score that they needed to get that scholarship. So we started testing early. We used predominantly CLT. And so we did the CLT 10 all through 9th and 10th grade. And then we switched over to the CLT, but we did the CLT starting the summer before 11th grade. And that way we kind of had a baseline already. Like, this is where we can look for scholarships. This is kind of what the target is as far as admissions goes. And so having that experience helped us to just say, you know what, it's no big deal. If you take it again, you get a better score, great, but you already know that you're set for these things. There's already something there. So we did early testing in order to keep that pressure at a minimum. And that was one of the ways that I think it helped our students in my own family, just to be able to mitigate some of that anxiety. So then we talk about, so test anxiety is real, and maybe you have older kids already and you're trying to figure out, they already know, like, there's too much tied to this. I don't think we ever completely counteract the narrative that this matters, especially when we get to the college entrance exam and they know that scholarship is out there and they have to get a certain score to get it. So I think with that, we have to say, what can we do to mitigate the effects of anxiety? Because anxiety really does affect your test score. So one is to get comfortable when testing as much as possible. then this is really hard if you have to go to another location and you're sitting in a desk that's unfamiliar and you're surrounded by people you don't know. So those things can be hard to control those. But if there are ways for you to test in a smaller group setting, if there are ways for you to do so in a way that that is helpful, our kids, because they needed to qualify for like the Hope Scholarship and Tennessee Hope in Tennessee, they needed a score other than just their CLT score. We made sure that they didn't have to stand in a long line. Like we would sit with them in the parking lot until most of the line had gone down, and then we let them walk up and sign in so that they were not having to stand in line for 30 minutes surrounded by people they didn't know before walking into the building to take an exam. So there are ways to help mitigate that and keep them as comfortable as possible. CLT, you can test from home, little plug there, but I would just say, it's a great way because students can be more comfortable in that environment and not be surrounded by people they don't know. Use familiar objects whenever possible. Again, don't send your kid with a brand new calculator they've never used before when taking a test for the first time. If they're used to using a specific type of pencil or whatever, try and get like as much of that the same as possible. Don't put them in a completely new environment and all new things and expect performance. Don't make them wear uncomfortable clothes. I know that seems really, really weird, but if they're going to go somewhere else and test, make sure they've got a sweatshirt that they can throw on too, because being cold and testing at the same time, that's just miserable, so do whatever you can to kind of help them get comfortable so it takes away some of the stressors. And then I say imitate the routine as part of practice. This is a little bit of an extreme example, but I heard of a story when my son was prepping for the LSAT that there was a young woman that knew that that what they say is that if you practice and you're taking practice tests, that there's going to be some like lower score on the day of because you're in a different place. There's more pressure than you do for a practice test, that kind of thing. And so she actually got dressed on Saturday mornings, the day she was going to have to take the LSAT. She would get dressed. She would go to the location where she knew she was going to be testing, and she would find a spot there. And she would take the test at the right time, dressed in the clothes that she was going to wear. And, like the whole thing, like she had really taken as much as possible into account for like, this is what my routine is going to look like. Well, she saw almost no drop between her score when taking practice exams and taking the real exam because she was really familiar. She didn't also have the stress of, do I know where I'm going? Where am I going to walk in? Where am I going to park that day? What is the traffic going to be like? Like she had already worked out all of those details. And so obviously that's a little extreme of an example. But if you can imitate the routine as much as possible when you're practicing, right? There may be specific skills that you want to practice. If you're doing, especially like a college entrance exam, maybe you just need to focus on math and take some more math practice tests or something. But when you are, as much as possible, do the whole test in the amount of time that you're going to have it done and do it as close to the conditions as possible that day. And that's going to set your student up for greater success. And then the other thing is, as much as possible, again, take time to exercise and practice some relaxation techniques prior to testing. Some students are going to do way better if they can go for a run, go for a swim, fit in a yoga routine, whatever that is, before they take a test, right? They're going to have some of the wiggles out too, right? They're just going to be more focused. And teach your students some relaxation techniques, some deep breathing so that they can slow their breathing and their heart rate, because they will probably eventually encounter something that they don't know. And that will cause their heart rate to accelerate and their breathing, and you're just not going to think as clearly. So what are the strategies that they can practice when they get to something that they don't know? And really setting up strategies of how to deal with unknowns is an important part of preparing and mitigating test anxiety as well.